Hi, welcome to Planted in the Word, week 16. And I am aware that we are pretty far into the life of David and we have yet to talk about him. And he is so worth having a conversation about. In fact, he's probably worth a lot more time than just a couple or 3 weeks that we're going to spend chatting about him. So what I'm really hoping to do is encourage you in some ways to dig into David's life a little bit deeper as you read, because there's so much buried in here, as he is a picture of Christ, and yet we learn so much about his humanity. He's just such a great character in our Bible and worth knowing about. So far, David has had some struggles, and I would like to point out to you some things that I learned listening to a sermon actually one time about that Christine Kane gave. And there were some valid points that I feel she's made well that I necessarily can't improve on that actually bear repeating. She made the observation that from the time David was anointed as a young boy out of the shepherd's field, to the time he actually became king, A, over Hebron, and then B, in Jerusalem, it was a significant amount of time. And he went through a lot during those periods that we need to pay attention to, because each one of those time periods that David spent not being king, he was still in preparation for his kingship. For example, even though he was a shepherd out in the field attending sheep, that's where he learned how to praise and talk to God. In addition, that's where he learned his skills of fighting using a slingshot. Then he's brought into Saul's household. This is where he learns how a king's court is run. And then he's also on the field of battle. And this is where he learns how to fight and yet fight in faith. And then he marries the king's daughter. And then he goes on the run. And as he's on the run, he is leading men. And he's learning a skill as he's on the run, leading this army, how to lead men into battle. And then he goes and hides out in another country. And he learns that art of ambassadorship and sort of negotiation as he lives in the household of another king. You will find, if you pay attention to each one of the phases of David's life, the Lord is moving him through hardships, and at the same time, he is preparing him to be the second king of Israel. So there are great things to pay attention to there. There's one other thing that I would like to cover before you go on to do your Bible reading this week. And it's two moments. Actually, one occurred last week, just a couple chapters ago, and one is going to occur this week. But they're both important. And both of these occur when David is on the run. There are two times that Saul prophesies over David and the coming events that are very significant, and I hope we can pay attention to. So the first one is going to be in 1 Samuel 23, verse 24, and it says, "Then David arose and cut off the edge of Saul's robe secretly." Last week we learned that meant that David cut away Saul's authority. It was significant. He recognized what he had done was not just prove that he could have taken Saul's life, but what he had done was cut his authority. And one of the most interesting things happens here. As David is shouting down from up in the caves of En-Gedi, and Saul is down below, and he's saying, "Look, I could have killed you." Saul then prophesies, recognizing what has just happened, and he actually says out loud these words. 1 Samuel 25, verse 20, or 24, verse 20, "Now behold, I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hand." Saul is actually prophesying and recognizing that the Lord is reinforcing what happened with Samuel and the removal of Saul's authority, and that it was going to be going to David. But it's so interesting. It actually happens again. We have Saul once again pursuing David, and David creeps into Saul's camp while everybody's sleeping, and he steals two items. He steals Saul's water, and he steals his sword. And if we pay attention to the picture that those things represent, they represent life and they represent his military authority. And David walks in and takes them. Now, he does return them, but the damage is already done. And what's interesting is that Saul prophesies right after that moment one more time. And that occurs in 1 Samuel 26, verse 12. So David took the spear and the jug of water from beside Saul's head, and they went away, but no one saw them or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a sound sleep from the Lord had fallen on them. So we know that David sneaks in, that the Lord is a part of that. But when Saul is woken up by David, this is what Saul prophesies in the same chapter, a little bit further on, in verse 25. Then Saul said to David, "Blessed are you, my son David. You will both accomplish much and surely prevail." He's recognizing that his kingdom is basically at an end, that David is going to accomplish many of the great things he couldn't, and that he is going to prevail using the army, the sword, the representation of what David has taken this time, and that David is going to prevail. It's interesting to note the very next time we see Saul is getting ready to head into battle, the one in which he does die, and he is seeking out the witch of Endor to give him confirmation of what is going to happen. So we are right on the edge of the end of Saul's life. And we have Saul prophesying at these two times what is going to happen to his kingdom and his army and the kingdom of Israel. So I hope that as you read through these next few passages this week, that you're going to be able to look for both the things that David is learning at each phase of his life, and look for those times that his mentor, Saul, the man that helped prepare him, teach him actually how to replace him, prophesies the end of his own reign. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you have a great week. See you next week. Bye-bye.